Welcome to episode 12 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. In our last episode, we discussed the search and customer satisfaction challenges of structuring your website to mirror your organizational structure. As an example, people don't search with product and market signals. And if you've got a bunch of products within your markets, that could be a problem. You should check that one out. In this episode, we're going to discuss keeping your SEO projects on track. But before we do that, Bill, you shared an article with me that I thought was close to home. The article was called Why Customer Centricity Fails Without Cross-Team Collaboration. And it's by Serena Chan. I like that she acknowledges the research as a product can occur on one side and designers are doing research on the other. And the research that they pull and the way that it's organized doesn't necessarily fit within the workflows of each other, the other parts of the business. I also like the idea of being customer centric. Everybody talks about it, but she's gone through the details of how you can help the organization and also the information that can be shared. What did you take from this article, Bill?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think she really clearly articulates that customer service is a team sport and we need to look at it holistically. I especially like the part where she throws the quants underneath the bus and says, hey, they're thinking about analyzing this. And we all need to come together and try to sync this because at the end of the day, there is a customer journey and people may encounter this user experience at any point. Is it our navigation is out of whack? Is it the information we provide? We were talking before we went on air on a case where when rich snippets first come out, we had an argument that, there was somebody that had a rich snippet saying the product did have gluten when it didn't have gluten, but legal saying, hey, there's like a 45-point disclaimer we have to have that while we don't have gluten, gluten may have been in the air and all the legalese that sometimes derails this. So I think we need to look at this. And I think another big pet peeve of mine and we talked about this maybe in the first or second episode, but there's a problem on your site, your CDN, like we use Cloudflare and it blocks somebody for whatever reason or a page not available. It gives you this long, like 40 character reason that makes no sense to a developer unless they look it up. And again, they're doing their job by putting up a signal. Yeah, I think we got to open the lens. We've got to have more people, exactly as we've been advocating. And customer and user experience is a huge part of maximizing web effectiveness.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, great. Let's jump into keeping your SEO projects on track. Bill, I think a good project manager is worth their weight in gold, but I also think there's a couple things that set the stage for a successful project. As an example, you really should have set clear goals and KPIs. Establishing objectives is critical, whether it's increasing traffic by a certain percentage or improving rankings. I know what I believe in is what gets measured gets done. That would be my first point. Another one would be creating a detailed roadmap. I think it's super important to break up the project into actionable steps. That way, where you are and everybody knows what the next step would be. Plan helps the team stay organized. And the third one I would bring up would be regular communication. You absolutely have to maintain consistent check-ins with your team. Open communication allows for identifying obstacles coming up in the future or currently. It helps facilitate collaboration and keeps everyone focused on the project's objectives. Any other points there?
Yeah, first I want to acknowledge this. The ask for this particular topic came from Laura at AimClear. So she wanted to know how she can keep, and the team can keep projects on track. What are signals that things might be derailing? And I think you did a really solid sort of overview of where things fail. And I think when we hear phrases like, how do we keep projects on track? It typically meant one of those things that you already identified as out of whack. And I think a lot of times we start projects are supposed to start on this day and we're waiting for procurement or we're waiting for this or that. And so they get derailed. And I think one of the things we need to do is really understand what are we in competition for with resources? Did we get bumped? And I've talked to many people that had tasks in the queue and they get bumped by something that's deemed more higher priority. And I think, like you said, clear goals and KPIs and timelines and breaking up things are key ways that you can keep projects on track. Because I think the hardest thing for search is we don't really own anything. We don't own the web infrastructure. And I said this at a conference maybe a year ago, SEOs really only own a set of KPIs.
Right.
We're supposed to make this Google thing work or this Bing thing work and bring traffic from organic search. But yet we don't control these things. And we often have little insight into getting projects done. The one thing you mentioned, I think, is critical, understanding how tasks get in the queue. And if we go back and talk about our episode on the IT line of death, we talked about creative ways to move your projects up the queue. But a good project manager is critical. And I've worked with a few companies that actually had a project manager that was load balancing between SEO and project management. So they were the representative to all of the stand-up meetings. They were hearing all the projects. They weren't like top line SEOs, but they knew enough to listen for certain words. Like I remember one case, they said, hey, we're going to migrate the site to Angular. And she knew what that meant and said, whoa, before you do that, let's talk because there's things we have to have in place. And so because this project manager knew certain buzzwords, knew certain debilitators, knew where our focus area was, she was able to, one, alert the SEO team, and two, also put in some checks and balances in that process. And so I think that's critical that we understand that workflow. And that ties into our KPIs. Are we hitting our goals? Is there a barrier? And I think a lot of times, and there's an episode I'd like to do because I was doing an advisory project recently for an agency, and he was saying, how do I know? I said, are your clients going to keep you? What's the roadmap look like? And I don't know. How do I know that? Short of asking them, and I'm afraid to ask them.
Hmm.
Here's some indicators. Do senior managers come to meetings? Have a lot of people dropped off in the meetings? In which case, if they have, then they're not getting value out of that time. Can you shorten the meeting? Can you lead with these are the things that we did? And I think that's another key reason why SEO projects sometimes get off the rails because many projects, when they start, we're doing things that will contribute to opportunities down the road, but not in the short run. For example, everybody wants to do an audit. Everybody needs to do keyword research. And these take time. And so if you've just spent 4 months trying to get onboarded and you're going to take 3 months doing those two tasks, then there's a manager that already thinks you've been doing things for them. And so if they don't see results at month 6 in their mental map of the timeline, then you're not cutting it. And they're
Right.
going to look for ways to start to, okay, I'm not going to waste resources with these guys. And I think the point you made is having clear action items, clear deliverables, but are there things that we can do that are immediate? Do we have a word that's ranking well, but maybe not getting clicked? Can we change that snippet? And these little nuggets will help give them some short-term wins and also remind them of the longer-term actions.
Yeah. I totally agree with all those points. I actually in a unique situation right now where I am the SEO consultant for a company where they're hiring an SEO agency. And if I hadn't been there, they basically would have done the work that's already been done. And what we really need to do is move the needle, and the reason why they're looking to get capacity. And do we need another audit? It's not going to move the needle.
Right.
But you brought up another point that I think is really important, scope creep and changing priorities. As projects progress, there's a tendency for scope creep. And I think it's really important as an agency to make sure that you're staying within your scope of work. Otherwise, you're doing work that's probably never going to be looked at as what you were originally hired for. So I would say you need to really set clear project boundaries. And also, when priorities change, I think it's a good idea to implement a change control process using a prioritized backlog and letting people know your priority changed, it bumped my project, and this is going to affect the timeline.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's critical. That's a great way to say, hey, you bumped it. I remember doing a presentation and somebody asked me how I would overcome that. And a few creative things that we did was we, like everybody, we list all the tasks. We tried to equate tasks to lift. How much traffic might we get if these words, and we use a simple formula to say, okay, if these words aren't ranking, or if these pages that represent these words aren't indexed, if they do, and we can get, and it was a lot of assumptions, but what it gave us was a number. What was the traffic we might get? And then we used an at now query. So if we could get 200 extra visits a month by doing these things, then every month we would go back to when it was supposed to be done. And let's say we're 3 months in, the at now query would calculate that it was originally 3 months times 200. So we've missed out on 600 visits. And I know that's a low number, but if you do this for a variety of tasks, it could be tens of thousands. And each one of these was because you knocked something out of the to-do list. So we can't even see results until that happens. And one other thing I find that people do is, and I put it in here as one of the sort of to-dos or follow-ups, is I'm really keen on, yes, if you do an audit, you often know where the problems are. But if you're not doing an audit, like in this case, where they're onboarding an agency for capacity and they're not doing an audit, but at least understanding what we call like a search health report or a crawl functionality report. And because I've seen people implement things, like one in particular, they implemented schema on 1,000 pages. And the client 3 months later was saying, how come this hasn't been done? And so they implemented it, but then the script they were using to inject it, the client actually broke. So we were waiting to get the script put back in the page. And at the end of the day, we were able to show in Search Console using the API that 900 of those 1,000 pages hadn't been visited by Google. So if they haven't been visited by Google, then Google can't see the schema. Google can't give you value from the schema. So try to use anything you can. We're not trying to embarrass people. But at least you're covering your ass, if you will, to say, look, we put it in, it was deprioritized. Here's what we expected, but Google hasn't come because you have 50 gazillion errors that it doesn't want to crawl your website. But really trying to identify points of failure up front. Do they have a really long crawl cycle? In that case, it's going to take longer, and you can factor that into your process. The other thing I like to do is look at the ticket backlog. To say, hey, can you quickly show me how many tickets you have in your system? And if there's 280,000 tickets and they're still chipping away at number 35, or what's your senior manager's sort of pet projects? And this is what I've heard other people say is that management will read something and totally pivot into some product centric activity and pull dev resources. So those are some really good ways. I think if those two things, the crawl barrier and then the current ticket backlog, it will give you a pretty good sense of when you might be able to see things being done. And the more you can understand that backlog of both crawl and getting things done, it's going to put you in a good position to try to at least short circuit or preempt some of the criticism you might get from the client.
Hmm. Yeah. Hey, I want to talk about lack of stakeholder engagement. You brought this up. I think if stakeholders are not fully invested or they don't understand the importance of what you're trying to get done, they're not going to advocate properly, or they may even delay your project and prioritize something above yours. I think it's really important to involve stakeholders early and often. Regular reporting with high impacts, even if it's a negative impact, if you're not getting the support you need, people need to realize that there's an impact to that. I was actually on a call this morning. We were talking about a new report, and the report that was shown to me was a really well done report for an SEO to actually troubleshoot. And I had to explain, look, the people that were trying to get to read this report, they want to see three graphs. They want to know where we were, where we are, and where we need to be. And it needs to be done within and understood within a split second, and it needs to be almost a one-page PDF. Do you have any experience with trying to get stakeholder involvement?
Yeah, I think it's like we were talking about. If they stop coming to meetings or they don't know what's going on, then they've lost interest. And what motivates people is understanding what you're doing for them. What economic value have you brought them? Have you helped them enable their KPIs? Have you, and I think you're spot on that too many SEO reportings, people spend an hour on an SEO report session and everybody gets bored and it's a lot of gorpy details that most people never need. Probably the best experience I ever had with this was when I was leaving Ogilvy and leaving Global Strategies. I had to do the road show and basically tell all the big clients that I was leaving. And I was in a meeting with a whole bunch of senior vice presidents and I could speak semi freely. And I like, yeah, you guys don't action shit. You don't do anything. And then I gave one example and the manager was furious. Like I never knew about this. And it said, I don't have time to read, a 40-page report with 8 different tabs on an Excel. I just don't have the mental capacity to do it. And that was like you said, those 3 graphs is what she essentially wanted. And my takeaway after that meeting was let's keep it simple. And on my last couple hours in the company, I said, I just want to look at this real quick because I always forget the name of it. Loom. It's like you do with Loom. And what I said is,
Mhm.
here's what we're going to do. We're going to take and we're going to give them 3 things that worked, 3 things that didn't work, and 3 things that we're working on. So exactly what you were saying, right? Where were we? What did we do? And where are we going? Or what do we need to do? But what we found was they did that. And then the feedback was we started hearing in meetings from people where these senior vice presidents were taking this like 3-minute video and they were parroting some of these stats like they were at a cocktail party and they heard that, hey, do
Awesome.
you know the GDP is up 2.7%? And it was all because something was digestible and it was something they could parrot. And what was even more interesting is they liked that we had something that we tried and maybe didn't work, but that we learned from it. And that was probably another, and I need to add that to my epiphany training, is how many big companies will allow you to try something just to learn from it. And so that's what we did is we simplified this. That look, we're going to cut these meetings and we're just going to do the video of the highlights. And then if they want, they can read the gorpy details. The other thing we did is we always put a report, like you were saying, whether we success or not. We used to call it the no bullshit report. And then we had some people that didn't like that word. So we called it, what the hell did we call it? We called it, I don't know, project static, some name we gave it to appease those people. But what it did show is exactly were we moving the needle or not?
Mhm.
And we led with that. We would say, and if we weren't, especially in an area, we might throw that leader under the bus and say, yeah, this person's not doing anything we need them to do. Why? And this evolved into sort of a where's the green report. But yeah, I think simplification, giving it something that's digestible, showing that you've done something good, or highlighting a barrier, something that fits within their wheelhouse. And especially if you're dependent on cross business unit, cross if you something outside of tech or something maybe in PR, if you're trying to get links or something, highlight those. Again, try to do it diplomatically where you don't throw somebody under a bus, but try to convince them, of what needs to be done.
I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You can also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group. I think we have time for one more idea here. And what I'd like to talk about is content production delays. This is a really big thing now. Google's looking for helpful content. Everybody's creating helpful content, semantic content, building out topical maps and building content. High quality content is cornerstone of SEO. I truly do believe that after you have the technical stuff in place. But creating it's time consuming, delays occur. There's capacity issues, writer availability, priorities. I think there's a couple things that you can do here. You can create a content calendar, which forces people to understand what needs to be done when, and then you can benchmark where you are compared to your calendar. And you can do the typical things like create templates and style guides and whatnot. And today now you can use AI to automate a lot of things like briefs. What are some of the things you've done to try to help fix content production delays?
I think one is like you were saying with the content calendar, but content prioritization. I think a lot of people get paralyzed by the volume of content and the volume of work. Are there ways to short circuit it? Like I've worked with companies, I just spaced his name, Julio Fernandez. He's now at Cisco. And one thing that he did was he started tapping engineers to at least write the content and then give it to a writer to wordsmith it and put all the flowery language, but he shifted it to someone who could probably knock it out in 10 minutes, the meaty part, and then let somebody else flower it up and organize it and structure it. So those have been things that I think are really helpful. And then I think the other piece is just trying where do we have log jams? And why do we have it? Because if people have an 8-hour day when they're supposed to be writing stuff for you, did somebody else task them to do it? Or were they on maternity leave or paternity leave? Maybe
Hmm.
there is a reason why they can't do it. But I find majority of the time they've either been tasked to do something else. And the big one, the really big one, is people procrastinate when they don't know what to do. You might have said,
Yeah.
hey, write this helpful. And here's this 220-page document that tells you what helpful content is. And they're like, I still don't know what it is. And there's experts that can't articulate what it is.
Hmm.
So I think when you simplify that, when give them something digestible to where, okay, I know what I need to do now, you're less likely to procrastinate. And then the third one, we had this back in the day at WebMD, where we had people that were fighting against this content idea. They were professional writers, award-winning writers, and the last thing they want to do is write crap for SEO.
Hmm.
And when we showed them query volume and how people were querying, they're like, oh my God, I just saw the next 5 segments of my article because they looked at how people were stepping through with queries. And so that was a major logjam breakage when they realized that they could use some of the data that was available that had been shown to them, but they didn't see it in a context that was applicable to them. So I think prioritization, enforcing prioritization, helping people get past any blockages they have, and then anything, whether it's AI templates or giving them something that's partially written, anything like that can help break those log jams.
Yeah, I love the idea of going to an engineer. I had an experience where I just wasn't getting anything back. And so I tried writing an article myself to get them to review it. And that was probably worse than asking them without anything. The thing that ended up working for me was an outline. You just give them an outline, like here's an article I think would be interesting. There's this much search volume. These would be the headings and the subheadings. Is there something you can bang out for me? And that ended up being successful. All right. Any final words on the idea of keeping your SEO projects on track?
I just try to minimize them going off track. And that nobody has a crystal ball, but there's obvious signals. Like I said, if managers stop attending meetings, if other things are deemed more priority, that usually tells me that yours is less priority. So trying to make sure, over communicate, make sure people know what you're doing, make sure you've tasked the most important things to get done as high in the process as possible. Those are really it. That's again trying to demonstrate value, and hopefully you get respondents that will keep your stuff in the queue.
That's great. Great stuff. We hope you're finding value in our conversations. If you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment and rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. We've got a bunch of listeners, but we don't have many reviews. We also want to hear from you. Your feedback helps motivate us to keep making these and plan future episodes to match what matters to you, as in the case of today. You can follow International Web Mastery on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X. Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.